public and be part of the public, and not just insular here in this community building. So if you would like to see an event coming up that is not mentioned, there's plenty of stuff that's on our meetup page. A lot of really interesting speakers, a lot of really interesting events, things like what's coming up this coming weekend. So check us out, see what's going on. But this board is essentially this year going to be focusing on two main categories that are in our mission statement. The first is community, and the next is our values, our humanist values, going out and spreading those values and advocating for those values in the greater Phoenix area. That is part of what we do here at the community center, and we'd like to have your input, your feedback on the types of things that you'd like to see. That being said, I'm going to bring Michelle up here, and then we'll do a Humanist Minute after that, and then I will hand it over to Mike to introduce our speaker.
Okay. Hi. I want to thank all of our volunteers and participants in everything that we're already doing. Upcoming events will be a blood drive. We do that quarterly, approximately 4 times a year. April 13th, Let's Geography is a monthly event. Dual event. There's a study discussion on a Thursday night and then a lunch on a Thursday midday on the same country. The free little pantry and free little library out front. We've got a core team that maintains those. Someone comes by about once a day and restocks and reshelves, and it's a lot of fun. Inquiring Minds discussion group. Cthulhu's Chosen Gamers. We have some people do board gaming on a first Saturday night. Crocheting mats. We crochet mats out of the plastic shopping bags and to make sleeping mats. Yesterday, we had our monthly crocheting, followed by our monthly VAST meeting, which is Volunteer, Mutual Aid, and Solidarity Team. And we talk about all these things we're going to do and want to do, make better, best practices. Anybody who's interested in do some orientation, anybody that's interested in being a volunteer or event host, that's a great place to find out. Next week, we start the Intersectional Discussion Club, and next week, or anyway, upcoming, maybe tomorrow, is Trevor Lyons is starting an inner development personal growth group. A week from Monday, we'll be tabling at the Mesa Martin Luther King Jr. Festival. And next, we'll probably do a winter kit packing party with the city of Mesa here in a week or so. And next month's packing party is a harm reduction kit. So that's a lot, and I didn't cover everything. So if you have any ideas at all how to make anything better, anything, like he said, that you want to do, want to see, even if you don't want to do it yourself.
Thank you so much, Michelle. One of the books that I keep getting reminded of, and I keep bringing it up to some of the other in-group that's helping design some of these events, is a book called Bowling Alone. It's this idea that as society and our trust among each other is because of the decline of things like bowling clubs, like poker clubs, like those types of things. And we'd like to see a return to that so that we can all have solidarity together and share ideas with each other. That being said, I'm going to bring Don up for our Humanist Minute. This is a tradition of ours that goes back a long time, where a member will say something about what humanism means to them, and Don is one of our preeminent members.
Thank you, Alex. What? Thanks for the opportunity for allowing me to embarrass myself again. Unfortunately, my mother passed away about a week ago, and Mom was 99, so she had a full life, great woman. But something like that really focuses the mind on human predicaments. We come into this world kicking and screaming, wah, and with our first breath, our eyes open, and we say, where the hell am I? Who are these people? What's all this light? What's going on? What am I? We find out later, I guess. We didn't ask to be here, but we're thrust into a world that is constantly changing. Sometimes it brings us great joy, sometimes sorrow. One day, be run over by a tornado, and a week later, we'll have a nice dinner at an Italian restaurant. So what do we do with this situation? Well, there's some great minds like the Buddha and Jesus and Jimmy Carter maybe had some great ideas. First, we need to conquer ourselves, control ourselves, do something about our selfish cravings, and think about others. Think about Los Angeles. What a mess. I mean, I've heard a lady the other day was sitting in her house, and she saw on the news that 40 miles away was this terrible firestorm. And 2 days later, she gets a knock on the door and says she has to evacuate. That's our world, isn't it? Pretty unpredictable. Anyway, after all this, I just want to say I'm happy to belong to this group because I think we are trying to help ameliorate the suffering of our fellow human beings. And I don't know what we can do about LA, but if you want to contribute to organizations to help with that, that would probably be a good thing for us to do. Thank you.
It's a good way to remind us that just because there's a final note doesn't mean that we can't enjoy the song. So I'd like to bring up Mike Shelton, our secretary, to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, Alex. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Doris Marie Provine, Professor Emeritus at ASU, for three reasons. For three good, strong reasons. The first reason is that Marie, as she is known to her friends and family and HSGP members, Marie is a real expert in this area of immigration. She is well regarded in the field for her research and writing and teaching on this area of immigration and law, immigration law. Secondly, this is the second reason, this is really a timely, important, controversial topic now that the voters of Arizona have approved Proposition 314. Marie will be going into more of what that means, but basically that now if this law takes effect, and that she'll go into the issue about where it stands in court, if it takes effect, it would make it a Arizona crime for foreigners to enter the country, enter Arizona across the border without authorization, which is, and would also authorize Arizona judges to deport immigrants, traditionally the realm of the federal government. And the third reason I'm pleased to introduce Marie is because she's my spouse, and I'm very proud of her. Marie, you can see from her bio, she earned an undergraduate degree at the University of Chicago and then went on for a law degree and a PhD at Cornell University. What the bio doesn't mention is that while she was studying for her PhD and teaching at Cornell, she also ran for town justice and won and served as a town justice in her small community in upstate New York for several years. And then she went on to teach at Syracuse University for quite a while. And then we moved here in 2001 so that she could start as the director of the School of Justice Studies at ASU. It's now called the School of Social Transformation, thanks to Michael Crow. When she came here, she had a time to finish working on her most important book, I think, which is about the impact of the war on drugs. The war on drugs, the contention, and she documents as well, is the motivation for making narcotics a crime was always racially motivated. There was always a racial instinct behind or motivation behind many of these laws, and as a result, the impact on racial minorities is huge. That was a terribly important piece she finished in 2007. Then later on, because living here in Arizona, immigration was such a hot topic, she got into that and did more research and writing on that, and her most recent book is this one about policing immigrants. And Marie will be drawing from this book, from her research and her writing on this for this upcoming topic. This is a joint project with several other ASU professors and right on topic for this issue. Let me just go ahead and ask you to join me in welcoming Marie Provine, who will be speaking today on the policing immigration, a return to Arpaio, Arizona. Marie.
Well, it's a real honor to be speaking with you. Am I properly in my sound thing here? Oh, that's because I didn't turn it on. It's this tiny little button. Now, I usually don't need a microphone, so this is unusual, but everybody can hear me okay, right? Super. Well, it's really, this is a nice group to be able to talk with us about. But I hope you don't mind, since I know we're all so smart and attentive here, I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground, and I'm going to start from the broadest and then eventually get to Arizona. And there's some statistics in here in the slides, but it's mainly to kind of give you a picture. It's not the specific numbers. It's just sort of big versus small that I want you to notice. And I'm going to try to not just kind of weave you through what is, but kind of point to us where the kind of political contentiousness is and why it's there. So that's my goal in this. And if I can figure out how to make the slides go forward, we'll get, oh dear, what did I do? I just hit one button and nothing happened. Yeah, I thought that was the one you told me to hit, Alex. It just made it go away. I can see it on my here, but I can't see it. They can't see it. So what do I? He said to hit this one.
Oh, no, it's usually the space screen.
Oh.
Space bar to go through PowerPoint.
Okay. Okay. Well, starting at the very beginning, this is pretty amazing. The U.S. Constitution doesn't say anything about immigration, and yet the federal government has claimed sole power over immigration since pretty much it became controversial at all. So all that the Constitution says when it was kind of dividing up the powers is that the federal government, the Congress, will have a uniform rule of naturalization, which they've done, but that's it. And the states, for the longest time, kind of did it themselves. And New York, of course, was the place. We're all familiar with Ellis Island and the immigrants coming in. But what you might not realize is that wasn't a federal action at all. That was New York City bringing people in. And it was like 8 million worth of people. So it was a huge operation. And when the federal government finally kind of said, well, I guess we should really be involved, they had to learn how to do it from New York City. So that kind of is an introduction to the federal government plays a very interesting and sometimes very passive role in this story. So moving right along, when it became an issue at a national level, the federal government did get involved with legislation, and these are a couple of the big laws that you're probably vaguely familiar with, and maybe haven't got them quite in the context I'm working on here, but you know, it's kind of like an occasional foray into immigration when it becomes really controversial. The Chinese Exclusion Act was a big deal on the West Coast because of the prejudice and fears of too many Chinese in San Francisco and places in California. So that got legislation that basically prevented entry of Chinese. And this entry versus internal part is something I want to come back to. The 1924 Immigration Act is, again, an entry restriction on, and based on race and ethnicity, as the first one was. In the Depression, it was the first time that federal and local authorities began looking for people inside the United States with all the kind of violence and sadness that that involves. And it was because we were in our own national crisis. It's a kind of what you might say a crisis-oriented national role in this. Man, this, oh, space bar. No, this bar. This worked the last time. What is it about this system and me? I think it's that corner. No, I didn't change it. I'm pressing a lot of different stuff here. I'm sorry, Catherine. You said here, right?
No, space bar. The space, like when you're texting. Oh, no.
That's not
You locked
working.
up somehow. Okay. Da-da-da-da-da.
Thank goodness we have an expert on hand, because that's not me.
Let's see. Slideshow. Oh, it's no longer on the current slideshow anymore. Okay, from current slide. And resume slideshow. Probably paused. There we go.
So from now on, I hit the space bar? Yeah, Catherine, just don't go far. Okay, well, just moving along. So do migrants have any rights at all? Is this all just, you know, can the federal government do whatever it pleases? Well, that's almost true, because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights gives the right of everybody to leave their country. Not that we actually pay much attention to documents like that, because we're kind of familiar with ignoring international criminal courts and that kind of thing. But it's very interesting that even at its most liberal, you have the right to leave, but you don't have the right to enter. Notice that. Okay, the 1951 Refugee Convention, and it's kind of updating in 1967, gives the right to seek asylum. So that's almost saying you have to be able to, you have to at least consider the issue of asylum. And then there's a principle that is worth remembering of non-refoulement, which is you can't, and this comes up in our law currently, you can't send somebody back into a war zone or a conflict zone. You can't send someone to Gaza or Ukraine right now, even if you don't want them in their country. They could be a mass murderer, but you're still not supposed to send them to places like that. That's the principle of non-refoulement. Now let's see if, okay, hey, this is gonna, but look at the numbers, and this is where I want you to think big versus small. The numbers are going up for refugee admissions, but they're not huge. I mean, we're a country of 300 million people, 100. Canada takes more than that. What'd you say? Canada takes more. Yeah, Canada's a much smaller country. It's like, yeah, so we are not like outstanding at all in this. Thank you for mentioning that. Asylum grants. Not all that many, 36,000. You know, from some of the rhetoric now, you would think it was tens of millions, but these are small numbers. And then we have temporary protective status. You may be familiar with this from the cat story in Indiana about immigrants eating cats and stuff, and ducks or whatever. Frankly, if they ate Canada geese, I think people might feel differently because, you know. Yeah, and there's a lot of them. But anyway, even the numbers there, and these are people who are in difficult situations, and it favors Central America and Ukraine, places we're thinking about where things are really terrible. Haiti, I think, is also on that list. And then, of course, we have labor migration, and we do more of that, and this is with sponsorship. So that's granted to about 1 million people a year. And I want you to notice that from getting a green card to even possibly being a citizen takes 5 years. So when you hear stuff about, you know, we have these immigrants and they're going to be voting and it's going to change elections and it's really not fair because they'll all vote for Democrats, we're talking about a 5-year wait if you have a green card. And we have, as you can see here, a lot of legal permanent residents. Not all of them are just dying to become citizens. Some people remain legal permanent residents for a very long time. It's not everybody rushing for the 5-year limit. And then that's a number, less than 1 million immigrants becoming US citizens in this past year. So again, the numbers are not overwhelming. So let's talk about illegal immigration kind of from now on. So staying at the federal level just a little bit longer, these are some laws that you're probably familiar with. The 1986 law was very famous because it actually gave amnesty to a lot of people, 3 million people. This is the kind of law that we need right now because we have a lot of people who've been living here without legal status, who've been working here, who've been contributing to Social Security under fake IDs, which, by the way, really increases the pot without the draw. So it's something that's been a benefit for those of us who are hoping to continue Social Security. And then we have employer sanctions and for hiring unauthorized labor, which doesn't amount to much because it isn't really ardently enforced. And visas. We've spent a lot of money on border security. I'll talk about that in just a second. We've made family sponsorship a little easier than it was, which was terrible. But mainly, at the level where most of us are paying attention, it's about walls, you know? And one thing I hadn't realized before I prepared this talk was that we started building walls back in 1996, but it was just a little bit around a much-traveled area. And then we added more. And then that's legislation, the first two, 1996 and 2006. Then we moved to executive action. And this is something that's been expanding a lot in the area of immigration because Congress is essentially dead on this issue. So Trump, when he was president, he authorized 450 miles, whereas Biden, when he came in, he was ready to tear down some of that, but it's no new walls. And then there a recent controversy over his plan this year to sell off the parts that hadn't been used yet at bargain prices, which, as you can imagine, was pretty controversial. One of the main things that we do is we put a lot of pressure on our neighbor Mexico not to get people to the border. And I don't know if any of you happened to notice there was a piece in the Arizona Republic about a migrant caravan of about 1,500 people coming out of Tapachula and Chiapas in the south of Mexico, planning to come up and try to get in the border before Trump became president. But the article went on to say probably they won't make it because most of these caravans now are being broken up by Mexican authorities. And what it didn't mention is cartels. But it's a very hard thing to keep a group of people together through all of that distance when they're on foot or riding on top of trains and that kind of thing. So we've been doing a lot of this, of trying to get Mexico to do some of our work of border control. And then we discovered, this is one that'll come up again, you've probably seen it in the news, Title 42. If there's a national emergency, that is sufficient justification in our U.S. code for shutting down the border. You know, if the place is totally torn apart by something, we can't continue with immigration. We have to deploy people elsewhere. Well, that was used during the COVID pandemic, And as you may have noticed, President-elect Trump is he's sent people out to research if there's a disease that he can invoke it again. So, are enough people sick with something that we can kind of pull this back? I don't think he's going to find that. A lot of migrants are young and healthy, and they don't have a disease, and there's not really another way to use Title 42 very convincingly. So it may be a dead letter until we have the next pandemic. But Mexico works pretty hard for us with our border control. And so what I'm kind of sketching out here is that there's some reasons that immigration has become a hot topic. We don't talk about this too much, at least in my world. We just talk about how terrible things are. But I think we should look at it from the point of view of why is the American public, in a large percentage of the American public, quite exercised about this issue, especially when our legal immigration levels are not very high. It's all focused, not all, but mostly focused on illegal immigration. And I think maybe looking at these big numbers may actually help us answer that question. And we need to be aware of how these numbers look to people who might not be very favorable toward the idea of rapid social change. But we're talking about a small but measurable percent of the population that's living here without legal authorization. We're talking about a lot of contact at the border. ICE being very active in these states, but a third of the activity in removing people is not occurring at the border. That's occurring really in jails and even the Canadian border, that people are being told that they have to go and they're being escorted out. And then the Biden administration has been slow to deal with some of the patterns that we're talking about here. This decision by Biden to require that that an immigrant must present themselves at a port of entry, that's a place where there's a station and a number of border agents and not just somewhere out in the desert. Biden didn't require that until 2024, and that's a very important thing because migrants now, they want to use their claim for asylum to push back against the initial decision of the government to deport them. So the way it happens in one of these interactions is that the border agents say, you don't have a right to enter here, you don't have a visa, you don't have a passport, you can't come in. But if the person claims asylum, then it's at least a matter of contention. And so the fact that that wasn't required to be at a port of entry I think that was a mistake on the part of the Biden administration not to do that from the get-go. And 8.4 million encounters with migrants during Biden's term. That's a heck of a lot of encounters. And this is an important number to look at, too. 5.8 million of those 8.4 million were released into the United States for asylum hearings. But there's a problem. Asylum hearings take a long time. Mike and I, when we visited Canada to do some research in this area, we went to an asylum hearing, and it was a really big deal because there was, it's a contested thing. There's evidence brought up. There's documents to look at. There's testimony. It's not something you just do, like plead guilty to a traffic infraction. This is a big deal. And it means that it takes time to do it. There are not a huge number of asylum judges. And so there's a 4-year wait. While you're entering the United States, you've got this right to a hearing, but you're going to at least wait 4 years. I've heard people wait 8 or 10 years. And that raises an interesting question for humanists. I have a friend who's a very she's a very religious Mormon, serious Mormon. And she told me she was helping a family from Guatemala. And she said their hearing came up about 6 years after they came into the country. And by then, their kids are in school, mom has a job, the family's completely settled. And she said they made the decision not to go to the hearing. And a lot of people do that because if you go to the hearing and you lose, you get deported. If you don't go to the hearing, you kind of continue on. And so that's, she supported that, and I could certainly understand why she would, even as somebody who was very conscious of being ethically correct. And so it's a real mess. Asylum is a serious mess. There's no way around it, and we don't talk about it too much, but imagine a backlog of 3.6 million cases. That's a lot of cases. And then I didn't show this slide, but if you look at the grant rates in the different asylum jurisdictions, there are a lot of, there's many of them all over the country. They're very wildly different. They can go from 85% grants to 19% grants in different places, depending on where your hearing happens to be. So it's kind of a crapshoot, if you don't mind me using that. I'm going to hold the questions to the end, if you don't mind, because I'm kind of on a march to get to Arizona. But I want to just say one more thing about asylum hearings. What you can see from this is that migrants didn't start using the asylum approach right away, but as they did, our system didn't respond. And so the backlog grows and grows and grows, and so we get into this never, never land of people really having to make a difficult decision whether to even attend their asylum hearing, and the numbers mean that the system is essentially broken down, and we're spending a fair amount of money. We don't need to dwell on that one particularly, but the Trump administrations like to spend it on the wall. We tend to spend it on, in the Democratic administrations, on technology and personnel. Okay, I hope you don't mind this title. I think the political response to this situation has been truly, truly pathetic. So as of the newspaper, like day before yesterday, we learned that President Biden is now allowing the Border Patrol to decide asylum cases, which is not as big a deal as it might sound, because they're going to have to pass a fair number of these on. They can't possibly. There's no legal representation. There's no time to really prepare. It's an amazing stopgap that isn't going to be very feasible, and self-respecting Border Patrol people are not going to want to try to make these decisions. These could be life and death decisions, because remember, asylum is about fleeing persecution. It's not about having a better life in America. It's about not being able to stay where you were because you are being singled out as a discriminated minority, or for your political opinions or something like that. So it's a kind of a methodology being deployed that doesn't really address the issues very directly. Okay, so what are the parties doing? Well, as you can see from this slide, I just kind of summarized, full of tough talk. You've seen quotes from President-elect Trump about how terrible immigrants are, completely over the top, untrue, incendiary rhetoric. And one of the things that makes me somewhat amused is that even legal immigration, and you saw those numbers back there, it's not ginormous, that's controversial as well, because there's this thought that we should be training our own engineers, our own geologists, our own technicians, and not importing them from India and other places where people get a solid science education, and we don't do it as much. So that's their internal fight. I wish them well on that. They can figure that one out. They probably won't change anything because the pressure to fill those jobs is constant. But if it means that engineering programs get a little more support from American universities, that's a great thing. So anyway, that's going to be a long-term little kerfuffle among the Republicans. And then my neighbor at breakfast mentioned the Lake and Riley Act. Lake and Riley was a nurse, I think maybe a student nurse, I'm not sure. Anyway, she was killed by an unauthorized Venezuelan immigrant. And so they named an act after her, and this is the one you may have seen, that even if you steal a stick of gum, you can be deported. This is a pretty transparent effort to congregate unauthorized immigrants so that they can be considered for deportation. It's not worded that way, but that's really the purpose of it. Basically, it means that there's mandatory detention, no release on your own recognizance, no bail for anything that you are officially charged with. And that means that it goes through some process of decision. So the stick of gum is probably not a realistic example of what somebody would be charged with. But it could be a crime as minor as shoplifting. And if you're charged with that, then if you are unauthorized, you are not eligible for immediate release, even though it's a minor crime. If it's a major crime, you probably wouldn't be eligible for release anyway. But the minor crimes make it very distinctive for immigrants. And the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, is apparently in charge of this. So this is not really a state-level thing. This is a federal idea. And how DHS is going to gather up these people, the whole mechanics of this is really, first of all, you have prosecutors who may or may not decide they want to charge someone. And we'll get to what law enforcement and prosecutors are thinking about in just a few minutes in the context of Arizona. So that's one sort of level of it. Then if they're in some local jail in, Topeka, Kansas, is DHS going to come and take them to some federal facility? And then what happens after that? And that's not clear from this legislation. And then it has this really interesting clause that states can sue the federal government for failure to enforce immigration law. It's kind of like Arizona being in trouble for failure to control water from the Saudi Arabians or pulling out of our aquifers. Or there was another example. We're familiar with this in Phoenix. If the state legislature tried to decide that if unhoused people and were making a mess in your neighborhood and it was taking down your property values, you could sue the state or other authorities to make them do it. And this is so blatantly unconstitutional. I'm really surprised that it made it through the House, but it did. Because remember when I mentioned in the beginning, the federal government, even if it doesn't have clear constitutional authority, it considers itself the master of immigration law. And part of being the master of immigration law is you can decide when you don't want to use it. You don't have to use it all the time. You're the state. You can decide, I'm going to do it now, or I'm going to do it then, or I'm not going to do it at all. So this idea that Arizona can say, you got to do it right now is baloney. But anyway, there it is. That's what I'm talking about. This is becoming so stupidly political because this law is not going to, it may not pass the Senate, but it's not going to work. And there's stuff in it that will be declared unconstitutional. And they all know that. There's a zillion lawyers in Congress, so they're doing it anyway. But what are the Democrats doing? Not very much. And I just want you to know that some of our local representatives, including Representatives Stanton and Gallego, voted for this. Maybe because they know it's kind of a bullshit law. But we have to ask, why did they do that? But they did it. And I think they wanted to signal in this new reality of using law to make political signals rather than to actually make real law. I think they wanted to signal their concern about unauthorized immigration. So that's a little depressing, but there it is. But I think it's important to know the federal context before you, oh, crap. Oh, wait, it worked. Yeah, in fact, I flipped ahead. Yeah, I'm zooming away. Wait, how do we get back here? I don't either. Catherine? Take it out of slideshow. Shoot. Okay, now I don't even know where I am. Okay, let's see what slide am I on.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah.
It's partly me and it's partly. Yeah. I know. Okay, I want to get back to slide 14. This one with the picture on it.
Getting down there.
There it is. Yeah.
Slideshow right there.
Okay.
Well, for current slide.
Right.
Current slide.
If you're having trouble, you can imagine what it's like for me.
Well, I don't normally do PowerPoint presentations.
How about
so
there?
I'm learning his. Well, I'm trying to make sure it's resume slideshow. Is it going to do it on the current slide? No.
This is too good a one not to share. Look for a picture.
Right click. Oh shoot! I should have brought my mouse.
It's right at the end now, isn't it? Well, where I want to go now, just in case we don't get there with a slideshow, is that now you can kind of understand from this context why the states are so, some of them, the ones led by activist Republican governors, we have set up a situation where it makes it easy for them to be activists with a moral righteousness that, I wish we could get this picture of Governor Brewer lecturing Barack Obama because she did that. You have to get past that one. I hope you can. So anyway, so that has actually worked pretty well. And let me just say a few things about that while they try to. In fact, I'll go over here so I don't have to look at them.
The camera's not over there, by the way.
I know. Oh.
The camera is right here.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
back there moving it.
Oh, okay. All right. Hi out there. Okay. Okay. Remember back in 1994. California, Prop 187 decided no services, no welfare, no public housing or anything for unauthorized immigrants. That was the first. There she is. Wow, thank you. Yeah, so I love this slide. I'm so glad. Thank you, Catherine. I'm so glad you were able. In fact, if we didn't have any other slides, this is the one I'd choose for you. Okay, so these decisions start getting made as this problem becomes politically really desirable from the point of restrictionists. So we have Prop 187. It was later declared unconstitutional. Then when I remember what was Mike and I had lived here about 5 years, and we watched on election night these propositions all get adopted, and there was some real sadness in the room. These propositions, just for anybody who's not aware of that, are something the legislature can't get through on its own or wants the public to take a vote on, so it puts it out there. It votes to put it out there for the public to vote on in the next election. And that's what they did. And these were all put forward by the legislature for us to vote on, and we did. And we voted with enthusiasm. Look at those percentage approval rates. This really tells you what the mood was. This is the time of Arpaio and this real paranoia that had been whipped up about unauthorized immigration. And we were ready to take action at the local level because the feds weren't doing anything. That was partly true. The feds weren't really doing very much. So we were going to take it into our own hands. And then SB 1070 was kind of the coup de grace. That was the big one that really helped push the federal government to realize, hey, you know what? We have a political problem, at least in the Southwest. We're going to have to start noticing this issue. And most of SB 1070 was declared unconstitutional, but not all of it. That later went into another law case, and pieces of that are still hanging around. I'm not going to go into that right now because there's not enough time, but I just want to note, and here we're in that political realm again, Arizona's push, and maybe California's too, it really worked. You know, the federal government under Obama, our democratic, liberal, progressive president, becomes more effective in deporting people than any previous president. He was, you know, go back to that slide of Brewer telling him what to do. And he responded. And this is part of that is covered in our book. So they introduced all kinds, at the executive level, all kinds of ways of trying to get the states to help them do deportation. And these are some of the ones: secure communities, 287G agreements, priority enforcement program, the fugitive operations program, criminal alien program. None of them amounted to a hill of beans. And it's because you have, you know, I really should know the number, but tens of thousands of law enforcement agencies around the United States. A lot of them are not necessarily interested in this. They don't particularly want new jobs that they didn't ask for and don't get paid for. So they didn't really get wildly enthusiastic. We have to start maybe thinking about the fact that Arizona might be a bit of an outlier. A lot of other places are not really into the issue the way our Arizona legislature and some of our Arizona citizens are. So that was part of it, and the law enforcement reluctance, the whole complexity of it, no federal funding. So anyway, that all kind of quietly faded away. There's never newspaper articles about when we don't have programs anymore, but you just notice they're not there anymore. And then DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Admissions, it was also a pressure thing. I think Obama didn't, you know, he needed to do something on the positive side, and DACA was it. These are the most attractive of all migrants because they didn't really come here, they were brought here. And they're not bad, they're good, they haven't ever done anything wrong. They're in school, and there's no path to citizenship. So that's why DACA remains this sort of thing that is really difficult, because those young people, this was 2012, what is it, 2024? So these young people are adults, they have professions, they have jobs, they have children, they have families, they have homes, and they still don't know what's going to happen to them. This is another example of the federal government not doing a very good job and seemingly incapable of addressing this issue. So there's DACA, not as big as it sounded. So that's when we came in with our study. This one with I love the graphic. Anyway, University of Chicago did a great job because this one was all about race and imprisonment for drugs, and they got just the right picture, and this is an arrest. So I love it. Anyway, so we asked some pretty straightforward questions. we wanted to look at what local police and sheriffs were doing about this whole mess that you're now pretty well informed about, of what the federal government was sort of not doing very well or not doing at all, what an eager state might be doing to make deportation happen on its own. How are they interpreting their moment, their situation as local law enforcement? So those were our questions. What are they doing? How are they responding to being pushed into this? If there are differences, what explains them, and what are the implications? Pretty straightforward research questions. Here's what we did. We conducted national surveys with support from the National Science Foundation, which was very generous with us. This goes a ways back. I wanted to put the dates in there so you would know that. We had some findings there, but the best thing was doing these in-depth case studies. So we went to these different places and talked with law enforcement, talked with immigrant advocacy groups, talked with Chamber of Commerce types. And I remember in Mesa talking with Mayor Smith. I really admired him because I went to this interview with my graduate assistant, Gabrielle. Gabrielle is a very tall, very Mexican, cornrows, imposing guy. And Mayor Smith didn't bat an eye, sat us both down and gave us a great interview. He wasn't uncomfortable that I had this giant guy with me who might have had a view about immigration. He just treated us very, very well. And these were our basic findings. Okay, and this might surprise you that police realize very clearly that they are in an impossible situation. They are, of course, going to be responsive to what political authorities say because their funding comes from there. Some of them may be elected, but they also have the idea in the United States is police aren't supposed to be like, the iron hand of the government. The police are supposed to be locally connected, and that has grown over the years. In this term of community policing is something that all of our respondents, all of our interviews, they talked about it. They didn't see a problem within their own units and some of them were selected partly because their background was from Latin America, but they didn't feel controversy within their own units. And of course, if you think about like Joe Arpaio, maybe there wasn't controversy because they were all on one side, but in most other places, it wasn't anything like that. Arpaio was, we found, quite an outlier. And gaining the trust of immigrants is a priority. That's not just because of the general ideology of community policing. It's also because you can't do effective police work if the public aren't your eyes and ears to help you. It just doesn't happen. The police aren't everywhere, thank God. And we are. And if everybody who observes possible criminal activity doesn't feel free to present what they know to the police, they're not going to do a very good job. And they know that. They know that in their bones. And so gaining the trust of immigrants is gaining the trust of everybody is really what it's about, including immigrants. I might have said that a little differently if I had more room on the slide. If there's a more conservative city or state, they might be more enforcement oriented, but not always. And then what surprised us maybe, one of the things that surprised us most, is a lot of places didn't have any policy at all. It was just kind of up to the police to figure it out on their own. The local government didn't weigh in on it. And maybe because they didn't want to alienate their own communities. I don't know. So basic bottom line, it's a patchwork. That was probably our biggest finding. It's a patchwork. New Mexico and Arizona have almost nothing in common in the way they treat unauthorized immigrants. In New Mexico, from the day the Constitution was adopted, English and Spanish were both part of the official languages, whereas in Arizona it's English only, and it kind of went from there. But look at where we are now. This is really what makes it interesting. And here's something in the questions I want you to kind of incorporate, because we're in a different place than in the Joe Arpaio period. Remember those propositions getting over 70% support? And look now, we even allow in-state tuition here. Probably Michael Crow might have something to do with that. I don't know. I don't know that story, but I'd be interested. 18 states and District of Columbia have driver's licenses. I double-checked on that. That's still true. We were forced to give DACA students driver's licenses. We didn't want to, but we had to. And California, I don't know if you're practicing medicine, but practicing law. You can be an unauthorized immigrant and get your certification, state certification to practice law. And look at the municipal IDs. That's a lot of places. In fact, I was going to write them all out. Yeah, I guess I did on that one. I had the states before, and it just was too many of them with 18 states. But a lot of municipal IDs tend to be in larger cities because it's just not, economically feasible. It's not physically feasible to not have people have an ID. So they created IDs for people who don't have U.S. citizenship and maybe who don't have a driver's license. So we are, our state and Texas, and maybe a few places, Louisiana may be emerging into this. We are what I'm calling here influential outliers. We spent a lot of money on this, putting shipping containers on the border, which some of them fell over and rusted out, and that didn't work very well. And then Governor Abbott has been more successful. He's got these terrible things. There's actually concertina wire on some of these barriers. But I think maybe his most successful move from the point of, again, it's always trying to draw attention, get some political stuff for yourself, and draw attention to the federal government's failure to act, sending migrants to other places has been a real wake-up call for public policy discussion. So Governor Ducey has a real competitor there. I think you have to say Abbott is the more politically savvy. I'm sorry, I'm sort of running out of air. Oh, is there? No, there isn't. That's okay. But our legislature doesn't give up easily. And so this is another one of those propositions that the legislature came up with, put it to a vote, and it passed. It didn't pass by quite as much as those earlier propositions. Lost about 10% there. I guess that's a sign of progress. Because this is another kind of bullshit law. Oh, thank you. Yeah, just talking so much, I'm running out of. This Prop 314, just to kind of review its pieces. So it's a state, this is the most important one, the state crime for non-citizens to enter anywhere except a legal port of entry. If you come through a legal port of entry where people have a great inducement to come, because that's the only place you can claim asylum, then this doesn't apply to you. But if you come to some place out in the desert or out in the wild, this would apply to you. And then the state and local police can arrest such people. But remember, the ones who don't come to a legal port of entry are going to be a pretty reduced number. State judges can order deportations, even of asylum seekers. What do you think? Anywhere that person is found. Remember what I said about plenary power and federal power. E-Verify must be used, including in federal financial aid and any federal as well as local program. And sale of fentanyl made outside the U.S. is now a felony. So I'm going to give you my predictions on the survival here. So the state right to sue for federal non-enforcement, I predict, will be declared unconstitutional on the grounds that the federal government is in charge of immigration law and it can decide what it wants to do, and the state can't be the nudge that says you've got to do it right now. It's not. I don't think that the court could possibly go for that. I could be wrong. You know, we got a court where one of the members just called the president-elect on the phone, so it's hard to know. But it really would reduce federal power if the states could just go in and try to force the federal government to act when it had chosen not to, or we didn't have the resources, or whatever. False documents. Again, it's a federal decision whether to prosecute you for using a false document to get some kind of a benefit. And the idea that the state can jump into that, I don't think is going to go. Requiring federal agencies to verify immigration status. Again, that is plenary power, federal preemption. The fentanyl law probably will stay where it is. Okay. This is really interesting, and some of you may already have read the Arizona Republic article. I was amazed. Front page, all of these law enforcement officers speaking out on what they will do under 314. Okay, and can you all see these are amazing. These are brave reactions. They, of course, Arizona sheriffs, they want more money if they're going to do anything, and good luck with that. But Phoenix Police, Maricopa County, Jerry Sheridan, he's Arpaio's #2 guy back in the day. He won't attempt to enforce it. Do you know what they're saying? They're saying, screw you, state legislature. That's what they're saying, and they're saying it on the front page of the Arizona Republic. Pima County Sheriff, not going to do it. Stupid law. There's none. Tucson is going to think about it. These other places, they're not going to do anything without more funding, and they're not going to inquire. Yuma Police, no change. We need community trust. It's a federal issue. They're telling this to Arizona. But and the legislature, I think, senses maybe they're not kind of winning this argument. So they're withholding money from the Santa Cruz County Sheriff because he said he wasn't going to go along with it, which isn't going to help even the most pro-restrictionist members of the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Department to want to enforce the law, since they just lost $250,000 of funding for what he said. Free speech is not available, apparently, to sheriffs. But I think this is something for us to take account of, because these guys are standing up to something. And you can say, well, it's because they didn't get any more resources. But that's really, if that's maybe part of it. But it's got to be a lot because they truly believe in community policing, and they can't do 314 and community policing at the same time. They're fundamentally incompatible. So here's what I conclude. All right, we're not going back. It's just kind of like what happened with Roe versus Wade. I was a young, sweet young thing when Roe versus Wade was decided, and I remember we could hardly mention the word abortion. It was just so awkward to say anything about it, and you certainly wouldn't tell anyone you had one. And by the time Dobbs kind of took Roe versus Wade away, the whole discussion had changed. And to see states moving toward guaranteeing rights, that was unthinkable when Roe was decided. And some kind of evolution has occurred here too, so that it's not, you just can't turn back the clock. People live their lives. They know what's going on, and the times have changed. And you know, I have this other thing, and you may disagree with me about this. Be suspicious of the hype on either side. When Lori Roberts wrote that for one stick of gum you could be deported, I was like, oh, come on, Lori. let's talk about what's wrong with this law and what's likely to happen instead of scare language. But I know some people think this is the way you should do politics, is scare people to death, and that gets them off the dime. So you may not agree with me. Support community policing. I feel really strongly about this. So when your local law enforcement officers get criticized, write a letter to the editor in support of them. They need to know they've got the public behind them in standing up against this kind of thing. It's really important. Obviously, we need to change the legislature, and unfortunately, we seem to be going in the wrong direction on that. But these guys are playing politics with us, wasting money, and no matter how you feel about immigration control, you got to do it in a better way than we've done it so far. And you can be on either side that we need to be restrictive or not, and still you need to have more braver legislators and ones who are thinking it through. So I would suggest that as humanists we should support all the legal challenges to the bad laws, either the Lake and Riley or Prop 314 that are coming down the pike, because that's where they will be nixed. It's not going to come from, unfortunately, being out in the streets and convincing the Arizona State Legislature that they just really better not go that way, because they think they're doing the right thing, but they're not. And they, unfortunately for us, don't have the law on their side. And befriend an immigrant, or as many as you possibly can, because this is, very uncertain times. And think about those DACA kids who have put their whole adult lives here, and they still don't know what their future is. So they need for U.S. citizens to be aware of their situation, and so does everybody, because we're in a kind of a crazy turmoil, and we don't know what the next administration is going to try to do, except I predict whatever it is will be done by executive action, which means it probably will have to do with the border. It's probably not going to be very successful if it tries to get all the local police to cooperate. We've seen, I think that's one thing our research really points to, is that ain't going to work. It's not going to stop them from trying, because a lot of this is about image, and it's not really about having something that really works. What we need is a path toward citizenship for the people who are settled here, so that we can legitimately focus on other issues of controlling our border, which is something a lot of people, most people want, and dealing with criminal misbehavior and other kind of issues of the day, like climate change and other things we should be worrying about. So that's my thoughts. I know there was at least one question because it came up earlier, so I'm just going to turn it over to you to field them.
Thank you so much. We do have about 20 minutes left for questions. I know that was a little bit of a chilly start, but I know that our blood is boiling now. So, and also wanted to mention, thank you, conservatives, for defunding the police. So anyway, I have a couple questions here. I'm going to start way here in the back, then move over here and then here.
Thank you. So it's a Class 2 felony to sell fentanyl that's manufactured outside of the United States. Is it against the law to sell fentanyl that's manufactured inside the United States? What's the difference?
It's just Arizona's way of saying Mexico's the problem. This is another, you really have to think of these laws in terms of image making. Yeah, it's definitely against, and it has to result in death, by the way. So.
Goobers in a chemistry lab in a garage to make fentanyl.
Yeah.
You're thinking like a Republican's the problem.
Okay, thank you for the informative presentation. So I have a question for you. When you said there's 11 million undocumented immigrants here, but then there's 5.8 million released on asylum, is that in addition to the 11 million?
Well, 11 million has been the kind of rough estimate for a while. We absolutely don't know the numbers. And the 5.8 million, wasn't that encounters? And
no, you said
the people who are allowed to
Right.
wait for their immigration status. They're not technically unauthorized. They have been allowed in to wait for their asylum hearing, so it does not include them. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, deportation will deplete Social Security much sooner.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. A lot of people, and I have no idea what the numbers are. I probably could research that. But the whole issue of fake IDs, someone was saying there's a kind of an organized effort to get a fake ID so you can work. And all of those people are contributing to Social Security without any chance of getting benefits. And so, yeah, it's going to have a real impact on Social Security if those people are suddenly either legalized or deported. Either way, that source of really ill-gotten gains is going to be cut off. Yeah.
I know there was a part of Proposition 314 that required it was healthcare agencies to notify USCIS about immigration status. So is that gonna also probably pass as unconstitutional? Is that gonna be kept, or what's the future of that?
Well,
aspect?
if it's a federal individual who's employed by the federal government, that's probably not going to stand up because that would come under what the federal government does. If it's a state agent that is supposed to report to the federal authorities, yeah, that has a good likelihood of being constitutional. Will it be enforced? That's a big question because, again, if let's say you do AIDS assistance, are you really going to say, oh, right, and I'll be happy to report any unauthorized immigrants? No, you're going to say, I'm just not actually going to do that. And I think that's kind of the same issue with the local police. The community trust of whatever community it is makes a real difference if you are working on the ground. This is totally overlooked by the kind of image stuff we're seeing.
Hi.
Hi.
I moved here about 24 years ago, just a student visa and all that fun stuff. Got married, got my green card, and had kids. Now,
Congratulations.
well, life went down from that point, Question is, when my kids were about 5 years old, I decided that I'm not going to take any risk of getting deported for a piece of gum that I might, I don't know. I would never steal anything, but you never know. I applied for my citizenship, got it, everything went smooth. That was a big eye-opener for me and changed my perspective about DACA and everything else that's happening for the kids that, as you said, they were brought over here, they didn't sneak in here, they didn't choose to be here as a child, etc. What is your opinion on DACA and giving citizenship or allowing the kids to stay here even if they're not kids anymore? What is your personal opinion with everything you know?
My personal opinion is, in general, absolutely a quick path towards citizenship because this is not 5 years needed to learn the language and the rules or something like that. This is just getting the paperwork in order, and they should be citizens right away. I think this is criminal that we've just left. Well, I don't want to use the word criminal too lightly here. I think it's a terrible thing that we've let people hang like this. But I'm also in favor of an amnesty for people who've been here a few years, whose records are clean and who are not some kind of big burden on society. It's a little tricky. You remember that principle of non-refoulement. You can be not such a good person, but from a place where you really can't be sent back. That's a trickier one. But we could focus on that if we weren't so preoccupied with people who really should be simply moving on. And this has always been an immigrant nation. This is nuts that we are in this snafu about people who have lived here. And all this talk, I've listened to the guy he's proposed to be the head of immigration services. What's going to happen is he's not going to get the money that he thought he was, and he's going to be stymied that way because he's a true believer in getting people out of here. But it's not going to happen. Mike?
Hey, Marie, thank you for this talk and for taking that
Yeah,
time
you
to
had to
put this
listen
together.
to me all that time. Yes.
I wanted to ask about, so I understand that this Arizona law is in abeyance until a court decides about the almost identical Texas law. Texas has passed a similar law. What's the status on that, and where does that go now?
I don't know what the status of it. That's a good question. I think it's at the circuit court. It's had a funny history where first it was blocked, then the Supreme Court said it wasn't blocked, then an appellate court said it was blocked. So it's currently blocked, but when it will be finally adjudicated, I think this is one of those cases that will go to the Supreme Court like Arizona versus United States did back in the day of SB 1070. But where it is in its back and forth trajectory, I don't really know the details. Sorry.
We have two or three questions left, and then we have nothing online, so we'll go from there.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I don't want to add to the hype because although sometimes I do think perception is reality, and I think that's how propaganda works, and I think that there's a lot of it out there. And so my question is, yes, the police have come out and said what they said, but what about paramilitaries or the dog whistles that are constantly being blown in Maricopa County, for example? Because I'm really concerned about that.
Well, that's always something you can think about because that's kind of outside the law. So, but look at how much has changed in the time since kind of the vigilante movement of Arpaio and his men and the pink underwear and the tent city and all of that. We have law enforcement who doesn't really like vigilante action. So that's one thing. We have a Democratic governor. I guess of all the things to worry about, I probably wouldn't put that at the very top of my list. I don't think there's the excitement at the street level that there is at the political level about this. I could be wrong about that, but I just don't see it happening. And we all live in our bubbles, so I could be in my little bubble missing a lot of angry rhetoric, ready to go out with my own gun and start fighting these immigrants myself. But I just don't think it's there. We'll have to, as we can say, vamos a ver, we'll see. Yes, in the back?
Question, I got a question for you. Earlier in your presentation, you said you talked to Mr. Smith of Mesa, and you had a number of other cities listed. You had Dodge City, Kansas there.
Yes,
now,
I went there.
I understand, and the only thing in Dodge City, Kansas, is a big cattle operation. The town is real small, so why would that be a city that was even considered?
Well, we spent a long time trying to get variety in our cities, and we wanted like we chose El Paso because it was a border place. Mesa was somewhat convenient, but we wanted a place where the corporate interests were strong. And not surprisingly, that's another kind of piece of this that I didn't really emphasize. There are a lot of agriculture, construction, cattle, and that kind of thing that rely heavily on people without legal authorization. And they don't want to lose their workforce, and they don't want to get into E-Verify. And even in Arizona, E-Verify was used twice, one for a business that was already bankrupt and one that was about to be. I mean, in other words, those interests in keeping your employees is pretty powerful among the poobahs that make these decisions.
Right. I understand Kansas is full of cattle operations. Every little town in Kansas pretty much has a cattle operation. And back in the 70s, Vietnamese were used there. Now they're going down and jumping on other.
Right.
People can't hear you whenever you don't have the microphone.
Well, there's this whole issue of unauthorized immigrants do not get adequate pay and benefits because they have that liability, which is, and then they're contributing to Social Security. The whole thing is deeply unfair, obviously. There was a question in the back.
Yeah. Dr. Provine, thank you very much for your presentation. Really appreciate it, especially your comments on the fact that the war on drugs was always a war on the poor and brown people. You on your page that said the government's response was pathetic. Regarding Democrats, you said they've been basically silent. I've been complaining for decades that Democrats need to get mean about these things. Last Saturday, a week ago, Gina Castino, Secretary of Arizona, had a great workshop up in North Phoenix. And I made a comment in there in the Q&A part about the fact that she's a real warrior for great causes, but she's not mean enough. She made some comments about Tom Horn, the hypocrite who's head of our Arizona Department of Education, and she should have been meaner about it. My question to you is, do you think that a big reason that the liberals keep getting creamed over and over again is because they're just not mean enough, and Republicans are willing to murder people to get what they want? Thank you.
Well, my personal opinion is Democrats don't have enough spine. They need a lot more of that. Being mean can be useful in some situations and not in others. But coming out for things that people really care about, like healthcare reform, that should have been #1 in the presidential race, because a lot of people think that's really important. Saying that there's nothing I would change in the current absolutely super hawkish Biden presidency, I think was a huge mistake. So I think it's partly spine, not saying that Biden was becoming disabled and keeping that a secret until we all got to see it on television. You know, that's spinelessness. So that's my diagnosis, lack of spine.
Okay, we have one final question, and then we will wrap us up.
One quick thing is the Prop 308 looks like around 2022, voters approved the tuition, in-state tuition for immigrants. I sent you the
Yes,
link.
thank you. Thank you for mentioning that, Nancy. Did you want to say more?
Yeah, because I just was going to say that. But the main thing I wanted to ask is, would you weigh in on the H1N1 crisis that now Musk and others, and even Trump, want to increase immigration on that level while they're planning, I think, a big deportation in D.C. to start out? So
I've got to say, I just love the fact that they're all tied in knots about this. It's because there's two wings. They're the true restrictionists who want to make America look more like it did in the 50s. And then there are the business people who say, we need these people, we haven't got them. Too many people are majoring in justice studies and psychology and communications, and not enough are studying engineering and material science. I think the corporatists are going to win this one. But the fact that they're all tied up about it and they're having tough discussions, more power to them. Who cares?
Thank you so much for an outstanding presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I want to especially thank Catherine for saving my ass.
So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for attending this morning.